Well, welcome everybody. It's really gratifying to see this many students who are assembled today and are interested in neurosurgery and are thinking, a lot of you I know are thinking very seriously about this and are getting closer. As Jazz said, this talk that I give is usually reserved for fourth year medical students who are in the interview process. Uh, it, have gotten all the way to the point where they've applied for neurosurgery training programs and now are engaged in something called the match, which I hope most of you know something about. You can't just pick the place you want to go train and go there. Obviously, a computer does everything in life for us, and the match is computerized and matches candidates with training programs. And when we get our roster of fourth year medical students who are interested in our training program, and we come through in the good old days before COVID with face-to-face visits, this is the talk that I give them. And I think it's, as Jazz said, time's going to fly pretty quick. And for those of you who stick with neurosurgery as a career choice, hopefully this information will be valuable. I got to find my advance here. So we'll usually interview about 15 people at a time, and obviously they've flown in from around the country. We didn't do Zoom back then, so we always welcome them. We thank them for at least looking at our training program as a place to potentially do their training. But most important message that I can give these people who are on track to become a neurosurgeon is their congratulations, because as you're going to see in a few minutes, the numbers are not in your favor. The numbers are not in the favor of any medical student becoming a neurosurgeon, and I'll show you why that is. So in order to do this, you've really got to up your game in terms of your academics and your desirability as a candidate to train in the very few training programs there are in the country. To get a position in the neurosurgical training program, it's pretty stiff competition. So a lot of you are previous athletes and artists and so on and so forth, so you know about the kind of work it takes to put in to do something on a highly advanced basis. And neurosurgery training is no different. So what's the match all about? What happens in it? What are the numbers? Every medical student's next goal is to find a place to train in subspecialty medicine, whether it be internal medicine or pediatrics or radiology or whatever it is. And that whole thing is run by basically a computer. At any given time in this country, there are about 70,000 medical students. And I'm going to show you in a minute that our match is not just restricted to American medical students. So the competition to get a position as a PGY1 is maybe even stiffer than I'm going to make it out to be. Obviously, all of any of you that are seniors or soon to be seniors are going to face this issue. You got to decide what you want to do in terms of subspecialty medicine, and you've got to figure out a place to go and train in that subspecialty in a program that hopefully is conducive to your type of learning and the environment that you want to learn in for the next X number of years. And unfortunately, in neurosurgery, it's 7 years. So this is data that's hot off the press. This is what happened in the match last week that now generated a brand new PGY1 class that is going to start their neurosurgical training in June. Obviously, most of the people that enter a match like this are coming out of their senior year of medical school. And this year we had 19,866 seniors that entered the match. That's a lot of people, but the good news is that there are actually 38,000 positions in the match. And if you look at just the PGY1 positions, because there are PGY2 positions in this match also, there's 35,000 positions. That's the good news. You can see the bad news in that this year we got 44,000 applications for those 38,000 positions, which means somebody's not going to get a job. Somebody's not going to train when they want to and where they want to. So there is quite a stiff competition. That's not your competition. If you go into neurosurgery, you've got a whole different set of numbers to contend with. And the kind of the defining number is how many training programs there are to apply to. And unlike internal medicine, where there may be upwards of 200 programs, neurosurgery only has 115 training programs. And that's governed by an organization called the ACGME, which is the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, that accredits people to be able to train neurosurgery residents. Right now we have 115 programs. Those 115 programs generate 234 PGY1 positions. So the good news is all 16,000 senior medical students don't want to go into neurosurgery. That'd be a disaster. But there are a few that do, and I'll show you how many. So this year there were 234 PGY1 slots open. We make up, as neurosurgeons, we make up 0.7% of the match. That's how tiny fraction we are and how competitive that makes this sort of pyramidal shaped experience that everybody has to go through to eventually become a neurosurgery resident. And for those 234 slots, there were 269 American fourth-year medical students that applied, and that's usually was considered the kind of the sweet spot. Those were the people that neurosurgery training programs wanted to attract. And I'm going to show you how neurosurgery has changed over the years. So for those 234 slots, there were 402 applications, which is the kind of the sad news. That means a lot of people didn't become a neurosurgeon this year. So here's a breakdown. Needless to say, all 234 slots filled. That wouldn't surprise anybody. So there were no unfilled programs. There were no open slots left over after the match was over. A word about the, in fact, there's going to be more than one word about it, but we still track your USMLE board scores, and there's a reason for that, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but the average USMLE step 1 score for those that matched this year was 248, which is pretty high. So that's another issue, and we'll talk about that. Now, this is a lot different, frankly, than what's been happening over the last 30 years in neurosurgery. In that, for the most part, over 90% of the PGY1 positions were given to US seniors, meaning fourth-year medical students who tracked in a more traditional way to their PGY1 year. But these numbers are a lot different this year, in that you'll see that 11 of the slots went to people who had already graduated from medical school and had done something else. Perhaps some research, perhaps they went and got a PhD. Some of them went and got other degrees like MHAs or even MBAs, and then cycled back into the medical education process. So I think it shows a little bit about how traditions are changing in neurosurgical education. Over the last about 8 or 9 years, the osteopathic schools have been able to, osteopathic grads have been able to apply to the residency, and you'll see that not only did 6 MS4s from osteopathic schools match, but 2 osteopathic grads matched this year, which is really a pivot from what the tradition has been. And then even more remarkable, I think, are the international medical grads, 6 of whom are U.S. U.S. Citizens, but to me, an astounding 11 were international medical grads who are non-U.S. citizens. So neurosurgery is becoming a much bigger tent, if you will, from a ecumenical standpoint. So that's the match, and that's how you get us positioned. And we'll talk a little bit more about, and I know Giannotta will talk a little bit more about some of the characteristics, and we'll be talking about that the rest of the day, some of the characteristics that training programs look for in order to try to make their match as successful as possible. All right, so it's surprising to me that some fourth-year medical students who are tracking towards neurosurgery don't know a lot about the other organization that's going to rule your life if you become a neurosurgeon. That's the American Board of Neurological Surgery. The American Board sets the standards for what the knowledge base is for neurosurgery and decides if you're going to be a certified surgeon or not. And they set up the training in terms of what is to be taught. And getting there is once you become a PGY1, this is the track that you'll take. So the first year is done, 6 months is done in neurosurgery, and 3 months is done in some other specialties, and then there's some electives, and the other specialties include and are necessary to have intense training in critical care. Some critical care, doesn't have to be neurocritical care, but critical care is as important in neurosurgery as probably it is in any other specialty, including trauma. The neurosurgery residency is 7 years long. It's 84 months. 54 of those months are done actively on the wards, in the ORs, in the clinics, taking care of neurosurgical patients. And 3 months are done in basic clinical neuroscience, such as neurology, neuro-ophthalmology, neuroradiology, et cetera. The rest of the time can be in electives and can be in research, which appeals to a lot of you young budding scientists, and neurosurgery is a great place to train if you have an interest in neuroscience and you want to be in academic medicine. There are 2 exams, 2 hurdles to get over to become board certified. There's a written exam that takes place during the residency. It's an all-day thing. It's about 520 questions or so, and you have to pass this thing at some point in time in your residency, or you can't complete your residency, which goes back to the focus that a lot of the training programs have on USMLE scores, because it's a test that mimics the USMLE in terms of the format of the test. And so nobody wants to pick a neurosurgical resident and have that resident fail to pass a test because they're not a good test taker. So for the foreseeable future, I suspect that as long as the American board says you can't become a neurosurgery resident and you can't complete your neurosurgical training, which means be a chief resident, until you pass that test, we're going to be looking at your prowess as a test taker. And the USMLE is as good as any index for that. All right. Neurosurgery has what's called a chief residency year. Everybody has to do one. It's a time when you get extra responsibilities in terms of administration. Every neurosurgery training program has a different version of this. Some in more restricted environments, it simply means that the chief resident decides which junior residents go to the OR on a given day and who goes to clinic. In other programs analogous to ours, where there's a safety net hospital involved, and a lot of primary responsibility on residents to give care to patients. There's a lot more autonomy in terms of being the chief resident, and you may get a lot of autonomy in decision making for patient care and surgical care. Once you complete that chief residency year, you're not done. First of all, a formality, which is an important formality, but a program director has to put a note in your file that's probably only 2 sentences long that you have completed the training program and that you are now qualified to practice independently in the community. That still doesn't make you a board certified neurosurgeon. A board certified neurosurgeon then has to practice for several years, accumulate 125 consecutive surgical cases with 3 months follow-up with outcomes, and submit that to the American board. And at that point in time, you would be scheduled to take your oral examination. Once that oral exam is taken and passed, then you've completed the process of becoming board certified. So it is a lengthy process, very rigorous process, needless to say, and that's what makes neurosurgery neurosurgery. All right, so that's the American board. There's another organization that will oversee your life in the next 7 to 10 years, and that's the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. And they do this through residency review committees, and there's a residency review committee for neurosurgery, which I had the honor of chairing quite a while ago, along with the American Board of Neurosurgery. And so I feel it's important for anybody in this process to know how these organizations work and what they're looking for. The ACGME, the American Board, tells us what to teach you as neurosurgery residents. The ACGME and the Neurosurgical RRC tells us how to teach and in what environment that teaching occurs. And so they have their own rules and regulations, and they keep track of what goes on in the residency training programs to make sure those residency training programs keep their accreditation process. And one of the ways they used to do this is by tracking the number of surgical procedures done in a certain subspecialty and use that as benchmarks for how the quality of the program. And this is the list of that so-called index cases that we used to track when I was on the RRC. And you can see brain aneurysms, tumors, carotid endarterectomy, pediatric neurosurgery, movement disorders, Parkinson's disease, and so forth. And we kept a list of training programs and how many on a yearly basis of those surgeries were done at that training program as a further index of quality. To me, this made it, if you could get a hold, as an applicant, if you could get a hold of this information, you could get a sense for how busy you would be as a neurosurgery resident in this training program and what kind of cases that program emphasized. That information is not so available anymore because the ACGME has decided that all residency training programs should define case categories in terms of minimums, not in terms of maximums. And this is a relatively recent list. You'll see the same type of cases that were our index cases in neurosurgery, but the numbers that you see are not the total number of cases done at that training program. What they are is a minimum number of cases that you should expect to do as a neurosurgical resident. And so it's kind of the minimum standard. And that's probably for a lot of you who are going to go into neurosurgery, not as valuable information as you would want. On the other hand, you certainly would want to know any training programs who graduate residents that don't have these minimums. So it's a way to track the quality of the training programs. A word about about diversity. When I was a neurosurgery resident, all other neurosurgery residents looked like me. They didn't look like Jasmine. But that's obviously changing, and it's changing dramatically. Of our 21 residents in our training program, 5 of them are women. Now, neurosurgery is not a very good platform to do social engineering because there's only 900 or 1,000 neurosurgery residents in the whole country. But we do our part, and we're, as I showed you on those that list of the match, neurosurgery is starting to become a big tent.
Hey, Dr.
And
On
yeah,
the slide, I'm going to just say you have a 2-minute warning.
no, I'm done. So, the characteristics, back to the things that you need to bring to the program. You'll get a lot of awards during your career, but it's great now that we have the diversity that we have in our neurosurgery training program. So what do you bring to this? We've got to bring an aptitude, because not everybody can do this. And that aptitude includes things like fine motor skills and, unfortunately, a resistance to fatigue. It's one of the most demanding residencies of all. In fact, as a lot of you know, there's an 80-hour work week a maximum. And for a number of years, neurosurgery used to have an exemption for 88 hours a week. Lifestyle is a big deal when you're going to invest in something that takes 7 years. We go to a lot of weddings. We see babies born during all this process. And so that's something to think about in terms of your career choices. All of you need to have a role model, and probably more than one, in order to sustain yourself and be successful in this endeavor. And I would encourage you to select role models that do this as soon as you can and try to mimic what they do. I'm not going to talk about this. This is a leadership once you get into academic neurosurgery, and not all of you will be in academic neurosurgery, but it's a rich avocation to become leaders in our national organizations. Another picture of my favorite people in the world. Welcome to the course. Have a great experience today, and I look forward to talking to some of you on the panel later on.
Hey everyone, Ryan Rad here from neurosurgerytraining.org. If you like that video, subscribe and donate to keep our content available for medical students across the world.